Well, hello again to everyone. My name is Sasha Cahill, and I'm a hub director for a global organization that's driven by women, health tech women. Thank you very much for being here, and we're really excited about this event. It took a lot of people to come together, and all of us are ready to learn and to share our knowledge with one another. Health Tech Women is a purely volunteer-based organization. We have different opportunities available that based on your time commitment and level of interest that you'd like to express, please come see me. Also, we could not do any of our events without our sponsors and partners. Thank you very much to our sponsors and partners that came together for this event. And if you belong to an organization that would like to donate resources, or you yourself would like to donate time or any other resources, please come and see me after the event. A little bit about Health Tech Women. As I said, to become a member, you have to be a female. Now, we're not just a lot of interesting and curious females. We're not just females that looking to learn about the change from others. We're actually females that come together and we actually facilitate the change. We believe in sharing our learning, sharing our knowledge, and we believe about learning from one another. And we're here to do just that and make new friends. Thank you again for being here. Anieri?
Thank you very much, Sasha, for opening us up for this evening. And before we get started, because it's going to be an intimate conversation, so I'm going to sit right next to Dr. Lenz here. Did want to do a brief survey, so I'd love to know, by a quick show of hands, how many of you have been bouncing off the walls with cabin fever during the storm and just excited to get that creative energy out? Okay, good showing there. Another quick survey is, how many of you have been without power and you're just happy to have a place to charge your phone? Okay, so I'm not alone on that one. And finally, the question of the hour is, how many of you have, before this event, heard the term blockchain, but really had no idea what it was all about? Okay, so Dr. Lenz, you can see you got your work cut out for you this evening, okay? Because we're going to get right to it. So we've assembled a rock star panel of subject matter specialists in the blockchain space to really help you and equip you with the tools to understand the opportunities and the barriers to widespread adoption of blockchain technology in healthcare. And to do so, we're not just going to talk about it, we're going to be about it. We've actually assembled a case study, a real world problem for you to solve today. So we hope that you'll be listening intently through the presentations, and we'll be running at a pretty fast clip. Now, don't be alarmed, because you will have an opportunity during the case to really work through and get your questions answered. So we hope that you'll all take tremendous value out of this, not just the ability to learn, but also to contribute in a meaningful way to maternal and child health. So we'll go ahead and jump right in, Dr. Lenz. He is a principal with the Financial Risk Group, as well as a professor at Darla Moore School of Business here at the University of South Carolina, and is teaching a finance course on the topic of blockchain. So we've got the perfect person to pick his brain about, okay? So don't be shy. First and foremost, I think let's just dive right in. What is blockchain?
Wow, that's the question of the hour, right? Blockchain is, at the end of the day, a ledger. That's all it is a ledger. It's a different way to think about one, but it is a ledger that has some other attributes to it that are a little bit different. First, it has a memory. Second, it has a conscience, which is kind of unusual to think about. But those are the attributes of blockchain. All the things you hear about, all the things you see, in particular around cryptocurrencies, are one small aspect, but please don't confuse cryptocurrencies with blockchain. Blockchain is a technology. Cryptocurrencies are just something that rides on the technology, like any other technology. You can put a lot on top of it. And that's what it is at its heart. So it's I think a little bit more simple than people want to make it out to be. The problem that we have with blockchain right now, and because of news, because of all the things that have gone on, everybody's heard about it. And so we're all thinking about it in different ways, and we've heard all these stories about it. It's going to cure cancer. It's not. It's going to take us to Mars. It's probably not. In fact, a friend of mine who is the head of ventures for Consensus, which is the largest blockchain company in the world, he was also one of the guys who founded blockchain at IBM, John Walpert, says the first rule of blockchain: you probably don't need a blockchain for most applications, which is kind of interesting because that's his job. But even he is the first to admit that that's the case, that it might be oversold a little bit. So when I think about it, and when I look at the different applications of it, I always try to keep that in the back of my mind. Is this really necessary? Or is this kind of somebody trying to hype things up to probably get funding from a big organization? It's, sticking blockchain is kind of like sticking AI or machine learning. You're going to get funding for it. I used to work for a big organization. I know how that works. But it is interesting because I think that at this point, we see blockchain as 1.0, but I would argue that blockchain is probably 0.5. It's still that early on in the process. So one of the things that I try to kind of do is level set a little bit. So most of the people in the room have been around a few years. Do you all remember what made PCs ubiquitous? What made the PC on your desk ubiquitous? Way before the internet. Who said it? Windows. Microsoft Office. Microsoft Office made PCs ubiquitous because then you could put it on your desk, you could turn it on, and you didn't have to go to the DOS prompt. I mean, if you remember doing that, or loading up Lotus 123, right? Go to the DOS prompt, hit direct, go to run. And you didn't have to do that anymore. You could just turn it on and you had a word processor. You had Excel, pretty rudimentary version, but you had it. Slightly better than Lotus 123. You had PowerPoint. You had things like that you could use right out of the box. The problem with blockchain right now, you don't have any of those. There are no programs that you can go buy down at a store or buy from somebody. And I personally think that's probably the next step, is we're going to see an IBM or a Microsoft or maybe Apple or SAP roll out an application. And that's when it will really catch on. I think there are a lot of other things out there, but I think that's what it's going to take. Now, in the meantime, there are still people that write a lot of programs internally. I mean, everybody that works for a big company, they have some still internal programs that are written proprietary. And I think there'll still be a lot of that will happen on the blockchain. And blockchain offers some real advantages over a lot of the things that are out there now, a lot of the databases that we use. At the end, as I said, blockchain's a ledger, so it's kind of like a database. But just like a ledger, when you have a mistake, you don't go back in 3 pages and change something on your ledger, right? You put some kind of entry in there that counteracts the mistake you made. Blockchain is really nice because you can't go back. That's part of that immutability. That's one of the values of blockchain, that memory that I mentioned before. That memory allows it to just move forward all the time. It also allows you to go back and check things, confirm things. So one of the kind of cool things that I'm doing at University of South Carolina right now is we're actually do experiments on the blockchain. I'm a big hands-on guy. I have students going out there and actually doing transactions on the blockchain to understand how it works, and also to go back and look at things. One of the things I impress them with is even around currencies and things like that, cryptocurrencies, you don't see anything just appear. Things are transferred. When you get a currency, we were talking about currencies before, when you get a currency, it's basically forwarded from somebody else. When you go to buy something, you transact something, you're forwarding that currency to someplace. There's no physical asset. It doesn't reside any place. you're constantly forwarding the same thing over and over again. Even when a miner mines, and you hear about that all the time, cryptocurrency mining and things like that, it's creating something and for the first time on the block, but after that it's always forwarded. It's never cached any place, it's never put in a pocket, it's just forwarded. The element of trust that I mentioned, that's something that blockchain eliminates. It eliminates the need for a relationship. It's trust by proxy, right? Because all of your transactions are basically instantaneous. If are there people here from finance, from banking, capital markets, anything like that? There's a notion in capital markets, delivery versus payment, right? You deliver something and payment is exchanged, supposed to be immediately, it's really not, but we'll pretend it's immediate. That's the way everything's done on the blockchain. Everything is basically DVP. So when you do a transaction, as soon as someone accepts it, immediately it's a contract is basically exercised, and the payment, whatever that payment is exchanged immediately, and that person sees it. They can actually go on the blockchain and find it. So it's a very different kind of ledger, but it's a ledger nonetheless that allows you to think about things. I think for the fact that it has that memory, that immutability, there's a myriad of different uses for that. And one that everybody here in healthcare can probably appreciate now, there's a large healthcare company who I won't mention, who is being sued for plastic parts that they made go inside the body, and these are degrading at a very quick rate, much faster than they were ever supposed to. Well, there were some questions about the actual plastic, the composition of the plastic. A lot of chemists have looked at it and said, wait a minute, this isn't what it was supposed to be. So the company goes back and says, wait, no, we bought this through our regular sources, and no, it's okay. And they said, let's see the provenance. Well, that's when things start to get a little sketchy, because nobody can really assemble a chain of provenance of the chemicals that went into the plastic. So besides all the problems that the company is now facing, they're facing class action lawsuits and things like that, this plastic, when they bought it, was a really good deal. That's why they bought it. They bought 30 years worth. So they have this stockpile. In more and more today, we are thinking about the provenance of things. We think about the provenance of food all the time. We think about the provenance of chemicals. But it goes beyond that. And that's one of the nice things about blockchain is it's on there forever. You can't change it. And there are a lot of technical reasons and things like that we can talk about later maybe. But it is, I think, one of the applications that we're going to see people start to build programs on. People are going to start to leverage in a little bit different way. And as cryptocurrencies and things like that fall out of the news a little bit more, I think you'll see how many people are actually working on different sorts of applications of blockchain right now. The kind of the interesting thing is they're not the super sexy things that people think about. You're not going to be trading securities on the blockchain and stuff like that. It's a lot of like supply chain stuff, logistics, provenance of things. I mean, these are kind of boring things, but it's what a lot of companies do, and we really, really need this. So I think it's has a long way to go. As I said, I think it's still at 0.5, but there are so many possibilities out there, and the technology is just starting to evolve. There are only a couple of companies that are really big in this right now. One of them is Consensus, which I mentioned before. Consensus is on one of the networks called the Atrium network. They have, right now, I think about 1,400 people working there. Probably 60 different companies that are actually housed kind of under a venture capital umbrella, if you will, that are developing real-world products that are have real customers that are actually out there using them. There's a decent segment of them actually here in North Carolina, more over in the Raleigh area, but there's quite a bit going on. So with that, I will pass it back to you.
Thanks so much for that primer on Blockchain 101. And just a quick follow-up question, because I know you're coming from the financial services space, which is somewhat regulated, you might say. We also have a bunch of healthcare folks in the room, and both of those are highly regulated industries. So curious what your perspective is on some barriers to widespread adoption of blockchain technology in those spaces.
I think that the barriers right now are people understanding the actual application and putting it into place. Healthcare, like finance, has a lot of very staid companies that have a very difficult time getting out of their own way. We don't do it that way is probably the most pervasive thing that's said in those companies. And so I think it's going to take some company that is ready to make a mistake to jump in there. I think you're starting to see people around the peripheries, but I think it's going to take a company. I don't think it's going to be a consortium. There's a big consortium in finance right now called R3, and I wish them all the luck, but a consortium of banks is kind of like a consortium of economists. You're never going to come to a definitive. It's just never, ever going to happen. And so I think in healthcare, you have the same thing. You have a few staid companies. I think it's going to take someone, one particular company, maybe it's an upstart, that says, we're going to do this on the blockchain. And that will start it rolling forward. The other thing, of course, is, as I said, programs that are written on the blockchain. As we start to see programs written, it'll become more of a desktop type thing. But we have a second. I guess I have the microphone. I have a lot of time. So I'm actually going in for a procedure in a couple of days into a hospital and outpatient things. And I was amazed that they're still giving me paper. It's like, really? Still giving me paper in this day and age? The thing I love is I'll go into the physician's office, one person will take the paper, somebody else is transcribing it. It's like, give me a break. In this day and age, and yet it's still those kind of things. I mean, it's going to take so much to move past that mindset, I think. That's why I say I think there's going to be a leader that pushes everybody else to that point.
Appreciate that. So we have a number of leaders in the room today. I want to stop here and pause and see if there are any initial questions on Blockchain 101, kind of fundamentals, before we peel back the layers of the onion.
Who actually invented it? Where did it come from?
Satoshi Nakamoto. The paper was written in 2008, right after the financial crisis. It's a white paper. You can all Google it. It's fairly short in the big scheme of things, 7 or 8 pages, and it lays out all the math, which is not terribly complicated. It lays out all the theory behind it, and it lays out, I think, the architecture, which is really, really interesting. There probably is no person, Satoshi Nakamoto. It was probably a small group of people, or is a small group of people, but nobody knows who that is. But that laid out not only for that, it laid out the kind of the platform for Bitcoin, but the underlying technology was laid out there.
Fantastic. Any other questions? All right, well then we'll call up our next group of folks. Thank you so much,
Certainly.
Dr. Lenz, to come up. I'd like to call up Chris Kittredge, Khari Baker, Nesha Brentley, and Claudia Douglas, if you wouldn't mind joining us up here. We've got a tech entrepreneur, some developers, and a strategist to help us really unpack, the opportunity and the power of blockchain from a variety of diverse perspectives. So, Chris, I'm going to start off with you because, and don't worry, I'm not going to ask you if it's too late to get into Bitcoin, okay? Because I saw in the pre-read that Claudia shared, right, a number that got me a little bit more excited. So Gartner has projected that by 2025, the business value of blockchain is expected to reach 176 billion. Okay, so that's enough to get any entrepreneur out of bed every morning, right? So my question to you is, how are you dabbling in blockchain technology, and how are you looking to capture a piece of that pie, that future pie?
Yeah, absolutely. So the last few years, there's been a lot of avenues that have been open for both investors as well as for companies to be able to utilize what's being built on blockchain. if you look at the last year or so, people were a little bit skeptical because of the fact that since the last 8 months or so, there's been a big downtrend in the cryptocurrency space. And like Dr. Lenz mentioned, cryptocurrency is only a small aspect of what blockchain has to offer. There's so much more that companies are building that's going to provide a lot of solutions for things that we have a lot of pain points around. And I'll talk a little bit to those. But when you're talking about how to capture a small piece of that pie, I work with a number of researchers around researching the teams that work on some of these companies. So as you look at that downtrend, like one application, the first application was Bitcoin to become more or less mainstream. It's still not necessarily mainstream if you look at the adoption, if you look at the capitalization that it captures out of the global economy, or even like the derivatives markets or whatnot. But if you would have invested in Bitcoin even a year ago, right now you'd be up 65%. If you had invested January of last year, you'd be up over 500%. But the main thing that we look at as enthusiasts of blockchain is how are these companies going to build solutions that actually need blockchain. So if you look at blockchain where it is right now, and in the state that it's in, like Dr. Lenz mentioned, it's in 0.5, it's in beta, or even maybe alpha. So if you look at the early stages of the internet, if you look at the early stages of computers, like the internet early stages, you didn't have standardization of protocols, you didn't have great user experience, you didn't have many people dabbling in this. You had to be more technologically savvy to be able to reach out, make requests to network, get responses back. Most of you are familiar with web browsers. If you want to go to Amazon.com, you type in Amazon.com. You don't have to remember some IP address that's very convoluted. You just go there. It's very simple. Email is the same way. So capturing a piece of that pie, myself and a number of other investors have started looking, researching companies that are building on top of these protocols for use cases. A couple of those being like supply chain, healthcare, identity verification, stuff that's actually useful, because a lot of these companies have built on the hype of blockchain, and they've tried to build solutions. And if you look at blockchain, it's not necessarily a more efficient database. In fact, it's orders of magnitudes less efficient than a centralized database. But the problem that it solves is the centralization, moving that to a decentralized narrative, so that you don't have to have a third-party entity to maintain trust. So these companies that I'm looking at, they've built upon those type of applications to be able to provide some type of return on something. It could be the next Amazon or whatnot, but it's all about just looking for those type of applications.
And just really quickly, where do you see the greatest opportunities? So you've named a bunch of problems, and Dr. Lenz says as well, barriers to widespread adoption, but for those of us who are problem solvers, we see those as opportunities. So where do you see the greatest opportunities coming? Is it public blockchains or private blockchains, and how do you pursue those opportunities?
Yeah, so speaking to public or private blockchains, it really depends on what the solution you're building needs. So the greatest opportunities, I think, are going to be supply chain, and that could go across the board to healthcare. So supply chain and healthcare, in my opinion, share a lot of the same pain points. So if you look at supply chain over the last 100 years ago, supply chain was very localized. So it's gone from being very local to being globalized. And with that, the complexity has increased on a tremendous scale. And from that, with the complexity, there's been a fragmentation and a lot of silos built around the data for that. So the disparity between all those different types of data that are stored on different systems makes it really difficult to be able to trace back where things came from, make sure that standards are held in account, and make sure that things can be easily, like the provenance is maintained across the board. Because now, instead of having local supply chain, you have a number of different sourcers that might provide for a specific product. And from that, so for instance, you have a recall of a product, it's really difficult to be able to trace this back in time over the time of the manufacturing of this product, because of the fact that it's difficult to maintain and find all those different sources and connect the dots. So with that, I think supply chain could really benefit from a solution that's built on top of blockchain to provide different mechanisms for interoperability between blockchains, to be able to provide connections between data on different supply chains that are stored on the blockchain. That's where I see. So same thing with healthcare. Healthcare could obviously benefit from a lot of that, whether it be patient records. So there's no standardization. If you look at the way that multiple organizations, they have their own unique way to store data. It's proprietary, so it's very difficult, and it's not shared among resources. So you have stakeholders that don't have the ability to look at those records or counteract against those records. So.
Fantastic. So supply chain, I've heard a little bit of interoperability, definitely things healthcare needs, and also things our case will need. So I hope you're all at the edge of your seats on that one. So Nesha, I'm going to pass it over to you because I'm incredibly impressed by you being so early in your career, yet being on the front lines of this technological revolution here. Curious how you got your start in blockchain technology as a developer and where you see opportunities to really build successful blockchain ecosystems.
All right, so I graduated from East Carolina with the MIS degree in 2015, and I knew that I wanted to code a little more. So MIS brings business and tech together, so I knew I wanted to code a little more. I found out about Bitcoin first, and I was just really lucky to dive more into coding, and I met Khari, and he was already developing on the Ethereum blockchain, so I dived in and went into the tutorials and just started to gauge myself and understand where I could go. And then I also did a lot of research about where exactly the hackathons were. Where were these developers? So I took a chance, and I went up to Georgetown University, and participated in the Discover Blockchain Codeathon. And I got so much knowledge, and I was just able to just stay there and understand what other hackathons came. So I've been to over 6 blockchain hackathons, and I was just able to gain the knowledge and use what I've already known. So it's just been being able to be in the right place at the right time, and connecting and meeting with really nice people that are able to transfer knowledge. So that's how I got into the space.
And thoughts on building successful blockchain ecosystems. We've heard of it described as a borderless technology. And so as you're building these connections with folks in different parts of the country, different parts of the world, how do you design effective ecosystems within that?
Absolutely. So first, as a developer, it's important to look at cost efficiency. Why do you need a blockchain? What type of finances would you put into the blockchain? But what I've really dived into is the UX and how can someone use it. It'll be great that we have smart contracts and decentralized technology in the back, but the user experience and how can we communicate with the back end. So socially and economically, how can you solve a problem socially within your ecosystem, and economically, like how does this even, will it work? Is there a reason?
Fantastic. And Khari, I know you're an appointed member of the Mecklenburg IT Technology Services Committee, and looking at policy, for blockchain, how do you see that evolving in terms of opportunities or barriers to widespread adoption of the technology, and where do you see the technology going?
Well, honestly, from my experience, if there was anybody really in the crypto or blockchain space from 2014 all the way back, the technology that's currently out now is mind-blowing. Even though it's at 0.5 right now, I feel like I was in it at like 0.001. And honestly, it was kind of like what Chris mentioned. Unless you had a lot of technical expertise, you wouldn't know how to function or how to control a blockchain or how to send signals to it or how to mine. And honestly, the politics behind it was something that I was looking at very early, and the government didn't really start looking at it from a political standpoint, till 2013. And that's kind of when you saw the first steps in it being a property or being an asset, and then going into real estate. And from real estate, looking at exactly what does it mean to own a piece of cryptocurrency? What value can it have on just everyday life? And some of the things that I want other people to think about is, would you view cryptocurrency as food? Would you view it as a house? Would you view it as a car? Would you view cryptocurrency as blood? Would you see it as sweat? What are you actually trying to get from a person or a user in your ecosystem as far as your regular means? So from a political standpoint, the companies that are thriving in the blockchain currently are the ones that are using it for what they were already using it for. And that sounds kind of simple, but when we look at it, Kodak, when they went to the blockchain, they were trying to see, okay, is it great for compressing and holding images? When you're looking at video game companies like Atari trying to get on the blockchain, they're seeing if that decentralization can actually work with their network for users from different countries, because it helps reduce lag and latency on video games. So from a political standpoint, you want to look at it from, if my information is being bounced from this server to the next server, what occurrences do I have? So I know that there was a great debate that was going on as far as networking security, and if everybody should follow certain guidelines inside of the blockchain and internet. And Coinbase recently, their lawyers actually created a section for legal action within blockchain. So the SEC confirmed that a lot of ICOs that can go on are actually going to be suitable if they go through an American process. And that was something that we didn't have before, but because of experiences and because more companies want to utilize blockchain, that's a positive result that's coming out of it.
Just a quick follow-up, because I know we could talk about this topic for hours, but I'm curious, you talk about policy being set and established and multiple types of uses for blockchain applications. I'm curious, when you think about peer-to-peer networks and collaboration in that space and the need for trust, can you give us a little bit of insight in terms of what needs to be in place for blockchain to actually work effectively?
Can I get a show of hands of how many people are actually familiar with the mining process in the blockchain? Not a lot. All right, but everybody, I just want to think of like elementary school field day, or if you're outside and everybody's holding hand and playing Ring Around the Rosies. The greater output that you have from the number of users equivalates to the actual output that you're going to see and receive. With Bitcoin, it was basically, if one computer holds it, runs the algorithm, and stays alive, then the whole network, even if all the other computers crash, then you will still be able to run the system. And from that mining aspect, I look at the community, I look at the resources, and I look at how we can evolve everything. I think that one, I can't really remember it right now, but a great philosopher once said that if I could get 1% of 100 people's effort versus 100% of my own, then I'm really making a greater impact on myself and my business. And I feel like that's the case when I think about where the future of blockchain can potentially go. And honestly, that's why me and Nesha go out and talk to kids, adults, just any and everybody, to educate them on some of the simplest forms of blockchain. And we can do it in ways where it really just gravitates to your life. So if you're a basketball player, if you're a swimmer, if you're a dancer, if you're an artist, we try to look at some of the latest and current projects and technology with blockchain, and we try to tie it to fields that you're comfortable with. So as it's learning and growing, you're learning and able to grow too. So it's not too late for a lot of people to be experts in the blockchain field with what they do. It's just they have to really feel like they have the faith and the actual dedication to push through. When I was doing research and when I was talking to people in the Ethereum community, the Bitcoin Foundation, the Blockchain Education Network, I didn't know that it was going to put me in the places that I am today. But who can say the next 5 years from now, everybody might see a project and be like, wow, I know that person. So that's constantly what I'm trying to do. And the more people that want to understand and gravitate towards blockchain, I think that's why I'm here, because when I see the success in other people's eyes, that they actually get it, when they understand that this technology was really meant for everybody, it's just a matter of actually starting. And then that's when we can actually see more steps being implemented to where widespread adoption is just something that is an afterthought versus when will it be something that's adaptable now.
Appreciate you making blockchain so accessible. It's garnered a lot of enthusiasm from individuals to investors to corporations. Claudia, so very interested in your perspective. You've sat in that chair, as a former COO within a health system, really making those difficult decisions about what technology needs to be adopted and the operational implications of those changes. So curious from your perspective, how is blockchain being used in other industries, and how is healthcare prime and ripe for particular use cases of blockchain technology?
Thank you. Well, so I'm a neophyte in blockchain compared to, I think, some of the others, but I see a lot of opportunity through our clients and through experience in the industry. As you all know, healthcare has to change. I mean, the costs are not sustainable. And you see a lot of high deductible plans, many more people going to Medicare Advantage, managed Medicaid. We're going to see a lot of people with more debt in healthcare as you see high deductible plans, and most people don't have 5, 10, 15K sitting around just to spend on, especially in unanticipated healthcare. So one of the things we do at Deloitte is we do a lot of work in cost reduction, as well as I do a lot of work in our strategy group around ambulatory and helping large healthcare systems pivot to ambulatory, and how do they fund, capital expenditures, the operational expenses, how are they going to be more digital? I think virtual health, we believe at Deloitte in the next 10 years, your primary care physician you will be seeing them on your smartphone or on your tablet, and it's going to disrupt the whole relationship. And the quality and cost metrics are getting better and better. And I don't know about you, I travel a lot. I don't really care where my physician is. Obviously, if you need a procedure, you need to be local. But I want the best physician. I don't care if I'm talking to somebody in California. I can send my labs. My watch has a lot of stats on me. I can have a scale that transmits information, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's going to disrupt in a major way. And I think blockchain is a huge part of that from the standpoint of, think about EMRs, right? And as people become more mobile, think about if blockchain, if you could have an app on your phone, and if your child was sick and you were on vacation in Florida and a provider there in the ER needed to know things about your child, if you were able to, via an app, approve the sharing of that patient's medical record or your own medical record. That's not really, right now, talking about paper, I thought your analogy was really hit home. You still go to providers, many providers, and they're printing out reams of paper, or you ask for your medical record and you get a book of paper and things like that. So I think blockchain can help with that in a huge way. I would say a fair number of providers are protective of your information because they feel like if they own your information, they own you. But that's got to change. Consumerism is demanding change. And I work a lot on the West Coast, and Amazon, the whole Amazon, JP Morgan, Berkshire Hathaway merger, that'll be 10% of the employees in the US. I have a lot of friends at JP Morgan, and they're like, we are going to be the guinea pigs on this. And they really want to change. I mean, obviously they hired Atul Gawande, and they have a new COO, and the world is changing. Some of my clients on the West Coast have hired a fair number of Amazon people because they believe they need to crack this nut. And for those of you that have been in this industry for a long time, we used to have a lot more payers, right? A lot more health plans, and that's consolidated to a handful. I truly believe the time has come that we will see a handful of healthcare providers, and it's going to be the ones that are most cost efficient that are going to win. And people are working on it tirelessly right now across the country. And I think some of the big things you might ask, why is that different? I think a lot of the technology consolidations we're talking about, things that you can do virtually, and care model and pharma changes and medical device changes. Some of you may know about the CAR-T that you can put, the oncology procedure where you're actually, fighting cancer with your own tissue. So I think you're going to see more and more of that. Some of the things I talked to some of my cyber partners, because I will tell you that honestly, I'm not a deep cyber person, but we do have a deep cyber practice. And so I have my cards here because I had a good discussion with them, and we were talking about, just even checking in your insurance and verifying. A lot of times that's manual right now. Why blockchain should be able to do that? Think about the cost reduction to the consumer then. If you don't have these costs and the healthcare system is incurring these costs with a lot of manual processes, that should be passed on to the consumer. It isn't always, but it should be. Ensuring, improving the insurance claims process, that piece. I have a statistic here. About $2 billion worth is spent each year on updating provider directories. Why could that not be done? 75% of that cost could be cut all through blockchain, and then having the audit, because a lot of times, they have different addresses or phone numbers and things like that, and that could be a huge piece. Just verifying physician licenses. If you've ever talked to anybody that credentials physicians, that's a huge manual labor process. I know when I was a COO, if we wanted to bring on a doctor, our vice president of medical affairs said, well, it'll take 6 months because we've got to do all the credentialing, and it's slow, and it was very manual. And so I think blockchain, could be another use, and our team thinks it could be another kind of single source of truth. I think the accuracy of information through blockchain is huge, and the real-time piece that you all have talked about, and the audit trail. And so to me, it's a huge opportunity to help, healthcare become more relevant and cut costs.
I hope people's thoughts are percolating now with all of the opportunities Claudia just rattled off there. I think there's no shortage of potential for blockchain in healthcare. A quick follow-up to that, though, because we've talked about the impact that blockchain can have on business as usual in healthcare, but it also creates new opportunities for new business models as well. So a Deloitte study found that something like 92% of blockchain projects that were initiated since 2016 are now dead. Right? So what guidance would you give around building more effective use cases in blockchain, and also around positioning new business models for success using the technology?
That's a really good question. I think, obviously innovation, you have to expect a certain amount of failure. So that's probably actually par for the course, 70%, right? But I think as you partner more, one of the things, you didn't even know, I didn't even know you had that question. But I know there was there's a lot of project pilots, and I think the more you work as a team. So what I love about this are different payers are working together. Humana, Multiplan, and United Health Group are partnering together with Quest Diagnostics, which I think is an interesting flip, to work on, how do they go to blockchain. I think the more minds you have at the table, and the more barriers that each one can bring to the table, the better the product you come up with. So I would say through collaboration versus kind of doing things, in silos.
Fantastic. So we'll open it. That was a great segue to our next section, but we'll open it up to 1 or 2 questions from the audience for our entrepreneur/investor, developers, strategist perspectives. Yes.
What are the investment opportunities besides buying Bitcoin these days? Just curious.
So there's a number of companies, both built on like cryptocurrency ERC-20 tokens, as well as public companies. So like I mentioned before, those companies around supply chain, I feel like could be something that could be potentially valuable in the future. So companies like Origin Trails, a company out of Slovenia, they're building, their platform is all around the GS1 standards. So GS1, if you're familiar, are standards around supply chain. Companies like Amazon, Walmart, Alibaba are companies that are members of that organization. So companies like Origin Trail, companies like VeChain, companies that are building something that is not just shoehorned in blockchain. And then companies, if you look at like Consensus, or if you look at companies like IBM has piloted a number of different blockchain pilots. They've built a number of different mechanisms around that for companies to be able to easily implement into the ecosystem, because I mean the biggest hurdle to adoption is the ease of use, not just for non-technical people, but also even for technical people. I lead a team of engineers, and if we work with a product that's not easily accessible for the documentation or for implementing into an ecosystem, then we're probably not going to choose that over another system. So it's all about the research. So I would suggest just look for those type of, I would say like supply chain, healthcare, identity verification, content management. So there's good opportunities in those, in which if you research the team, make sure that they have the expertise. Maybe they've done something in the past where they've brought product to market and they've done well. But I would say those are probably 4 good areas to kind of look into. And then also you have, I mean, if you look at, I mean, I don't want to mention Bitcoin again if you don't want to hear about it, but if you look at Bitcoin, 7 of the last 8 years, it's increased in value. For those last 8 years, it's been, over 1,000%. This last year is a little bit of a down market, but I mean, there's going to be a lot of tremendous value in a number of different ecosystems built around that, and there's also going to be value around the companies, both public and startups, that are going to provide solutions, and a lot of them are going to fail. I mean, that's par for the course. 90% of startups fail. It doesn't matter which course, but we're also in an unregulated market, so there's been opportunity for companies to raise money outside of normal means. They've been able to raise money from investors who are not really savvy in investment, so they don't have the same discipline or the same motivations as venture capitalists. When they see something start to dip, they're going to sell that because they're not in it for the 7-8 years that typically startups are going to take to be able to reach profitability or reach some type of an exit. So I would say just, I'm not going to point you in any direction of a certain company, but I think those are 4 good use cases where companies are going to create some kind of solutions where it's usable and it's going to be something that's going to last. Yeah.
I would say, one of the things that Khari said is when you're thinking about investments, you probably need to think about it in a different way to some extent. I mean, if you think about the way that that people are rewarded, that people are incented to do things, it may happen in a little bit different way than what you expect. It's not like a venture capital deal where I'm going to say, I'm going to invest, $10 million in this, and I expect this return over this period of time. It may be a different kind of return. It spawns a lot of other type of things. So I would think that I would say that when you consider it, there's certainly the companies that you can invest in, as Chris mentioned, but and they're doing a myriad of things. They're doing voting. They're doing all kinds of things. But there are a lot of companies, like we talked about Consensus and we talked about Ethereum. Look at what Ethereum is. Look at what Ether is. What you may look at it as a cryptocurrency, but it's actually a technology platform that things are being built on top of. And so looking for a linear progression or trying to do a discounted cash flow on that doesn't really work in the same way. Open mind.
I saw one hand over here. Quick question.
I have a question about, patient records are pretty heavily regulated
Yes, me and Nesha during our tour of hackathons, we ran into a healthcare company called Hash Health, and they're in Tennessee. And one of the head blockchain developers, his name is Dion. He helped set up the regulations for healthcare and blockchain in Chicago. And basically what he was looking at was the input. Whatever your input is, even though it's going to be immutable, if it's a calculated input, you'll know that it's safe and you won't never have to really change it. So if you're putting your patients through a process where it's routine and it's almost foolproof where they can't mess it up, kind of like when you're at the stoplight and you know that green is go. Once you set up a regulation and a process for people to go through, you look at your analysis of, is my process efficient? So anything that's 85 to 95% effective and true with your system as far as a database, then you can migrate that over and see, okay, well, if I get these same type of results in the tokenized result, you don't necessarily have to think of the data as a cryptocurrency, but just think of it as a token or a key that you can actually hold, and when it's time to unlock it, then that's when you'll be able to need it. So there's an incentive for yourself to give out the correct information versus something that you might want to change later on, because we want to look at the results that's never going to change. We're looking for, like, your blood type is AB positive. That's never going to change. So that way, if you're looking for somebody else who has that same type of blood or is going to have something comparable that you can receive, then that'll be a quick transaction that can get to you faster than us having to go in our internal databases and see if we have a donor and have to wait for that person to come in.
Yes, so Walmart recently had a recall where normally it would have taken 10 days to find out where this product was manufactured, where the, and on all the way back. It would have taken, a huge amount of manpower and at least a week to find it. And because the supplier was part of Bitcoin, or not Bitcoin, but that technology, it happened in maybe 4 seconds. So the cost savings was immense. What part do end users such as Walmart's or major healthcare systems play in maybe forcing people in their supply chain to utilize blockchain? I like Bitcoin,
I think it comes down to a number of things, one of those being standardization. And as we all know, so with any type of data store, the first point of failure is going to be the person who's inputting that. So there's a number of factors that can be enforced, whether it be RFID chips to be able to, or NFC communication, be able to do that in an automated fashion, where instead of having a human input data where there's bound to be some type of an error, that kind of standard is enforced, similar to how GS1 has standards around how they handle supply chain. And with that being said, you talk about that study and so with Walmart, I mean, really the only way to enforce it is for adoption to occur, right? There's a number of hurdles that have to be overcome for that to be something in the forefront of everyone's mind, and that's, we're still in the very early days. It's very early. There's a lot of hurdles, whether it be scalability. Things are really slow right now. Imagine your iPhone 1.0, like the iPhone, original iPhone. If you were to pull it up right now, you'd feel like it was moving extremely slow, right? So that's where the technology is right now, and it's a problem that, cryptography has been a problem since the advent, even before computers, right? And there's only so much that processing can do, and if you look at Moore's law has slowed down, so there's other solutions that have to be built on top of this in order to allow for adoption. And once adoption occurs, those standards can be put into place so that companies like Walmart can say, I'm only going to work with suppliers who adhere to the standard, the same way they do with GS1 standards. They say, I'm only going to work with suppliers who do this and adhere to that. And that will kind of permeate out into other ecosystems, and it'll make situations like those a lot more prevalent. So it'll be 4 seconds to find that. You don't have to wait to figure out, So in China, there's a big problem with baby formula. There's a company that's working with RFID chips to provide a record back to each supplier of where all the ingredients for this baby formula comes from, because there's a big counterfeit problem in China. And it's not just that it tastes bad or it went bad, but babies are dying, right? So with that being known, this company is trying to solve those problems by using RFID chips that are automated. So when they go through the process, the consumer, the producer, the retailer, whoever is involved in the entire process has a direct line of sight to everything involved in that whole line of provenance. So I think that'll be the key to adoption and the key to those standards being adhered to and those kind of outcomes.
Fantastic discussion and great questions. I'm going to actually call up Michael. I know we have a bunch more questions, and we do need to get to the case. So I would like to thank you all for your contributions. They will be at your tables, so you have access to them in cracking the case. So thank you all for your time. And I'll call up Michael Johnson, who's the Director of Innovation over at Atrium Health. And thank you. Thank you very much. And Michael has been instrumental in helping us pull together the case for today's conversation. And so I want to pick his brain a little bit on how health systems are viewing blockchain and its potential. Michael, take it away.
I think one of the things with blockchain, if you've been reading some of the news, they talk about how the financial industry is the first place that's really adopting and taking blockchain seriously. Healthcare is number 2. And so there's a lot of reasons for that, in different groups. And you mentioned, or some of them were mentioned earlier today, and what they're trying to do. You have folks trying to do the patient medical record. You have folks that are trying to do their own coin to incentivize patients to basically manage and be healthy, which is really interesting. But I think, with Atrium Health, we kind of view new technology like we did with the internet way back when. Rather than putting out our own website, we're going to do an intranet. So we're going to learn this thing that's blockchain, and so let's find some value out of it internally. And one of the places, and we mentioned that it's not very sexy, but supply chain. There's a lot of things you can do with that. And I was actually talking with the FDA this morning, and they're very interested in device tracking. So the unique identifier in implantables, for example, or scopes that are being used, and tying that to infection rates and recalls. And so looking at that, and the way that we work with suppliers is very complex around some of these things. And so looking at the problem there within supply chain as kind of our beachhead strategy, where we can end up not solving the world, not just having one place where we can have some proof of life, and then proceed from there. The other thing I mentioned, I think Claudia is really hitting on it, was the provider directory. Optum and Humana just recently, and I think they might have released it with provider directory management. I mean, there's requirements that they manage that directory, and there's fines if you don't do it well. And so there's a financial incentive to having accurate records on providers. And there's also the efficiency piece. And so healthcare companies, again, are looking at that. And I think we'll find that first, where we're looking at managing provider directory, managing a pacemaker, before we're going to try to manage something as serious as a patient medical record. So before we really go out there and put this on patient, we really want to understand how this is. Because if we can track something like a scope, then we can track a patient identity. So that's where we want to start.
Absolutely. And from your perspective, what do you view as some of the unique considerations in a healthcare context that blockchain, folks who are looking to further blockchain adoption should take into consideration as they're building out those use cases?
Yeah, I think just being within innovation, we really want to focus on the problem first. I mean, blockchain, great solution. Healthcare, a lot of big problems. You throw it together, something ought to happen, and that's not true. We really want to understand the problem, fall in love with the problem first. In innovation, we do things like jobs to be done, methodologies, looking at human design experience and things like that to really understand what's the problem we want to solve. Because to the point that Dr. Lenz was making before, is like, blockchain might not be the right thing. Once we really understand the problem, we might fix it another way. And so we don't want to put blockchain through that if we don't need to. Understand the problem, but then also, as you guys know, healthcare is complex in terms of who's paying for it and the incentives to actually, and so it's a B2B to C in a lot of ways. And so really understanding where are the incentives in there. And that's one of the unique things about blockchain as well. You have the ability to put some different incentive models, but we have to understand who's incentivized to do what in this patient, doctor, hospital, so forth and so on relationship. So really understanding who's the customer in that at a deep level, and designing around that is probably the first thing that I would do.
So without further ado, I think we dive right into the case at this point. I think we've got a good background foundational understanding, and folks are itching to get their hands dirty with applying blockchain to a healthcare problem. And one of the things you mentioned really struck home, which is we have to start with understanding what the problem is. And you've been phenomenal in terms of bringing forward this real world problem that the healthcare industry is facing right now in maternal and child health. I'd love for you to give a little background for our learners today and share. I know you mentioned it came from a consortium right here in the Charlotte area, and would love for you to give a little context.
Yeah, so this is this actually came from, there's a Hyperledger's and other blockchain groups. It's part of the Linux Foundation, and there's a Hyperledger healthcare working group. There's also a Hyperledger fill in the industry gap, right? And so the Hyperledger healthcare group has got folks that are from, it's international, and so we get on a call every Friday and we discuss use case. And the use case that we've settled on was donor milk supply. And so the reason for that is because when babies are born prematurely, they are extremely vulnerable and at risk. That's why they go in the NICU, neonatal intensive care unit. It's very important, as we've learned throughout time, that they need human breast milk. Formula, sometimes physicians might prescribe it, but human breast milk has all the antibiotics and things that growing babies needs. And also, formula is also very tough on the digestive system. And so, and not always mothers can actually provide the breast milk. Some might, but there's a lot of times where they can't. And so we need to have donated breast milk to come in. And so there's an extreme shortage on human donated breast milk. And so what we also have is, I think there's not so much as we were mentioned before with the concern with quality, but there is very limited visibility into the supply chain. What you have is donors. There are some for-profit banks, but most of them are not for profit. And so moms or women that can actually pump breast milk do that, and then they donate it for free to a milk bank, and the milk bank then goes through then they maintain the quality and the checks, and they process the milk, and then they actually then get it to the hospitals to where they need it, and that gets to the mom. So what we're looking at today is, what does that entire relationship look like? As we kind of dig into blockchain and understand it more, it's really a lot about building a consortium. It's not something I can just do myself and really, it's not like a software product. It really involves a lot of consensus and relationship building. And so we're looking at, you've got a donor that's donating their breast milk to help out other mothers and babies out there that are in need. You have milk banks spread out there that are trying to meet this high demand that's out there and maintain quality and screening. And then you also have hospitals that really don't have any visibility into where this milk is coming from, aside from the milk bank, or the demand and the supply are very uneven. And you also have the mom, which, think of how many steps removed from the donor that's providing the milk, and they're giving it to probably the most precious thing in their life right then, which is their baby. And so we're thinking about how each of those have an interest in what's going on there, and we wanted to really kind of put some of the things we've heard about and learned about with blockchain today through the paces. And so, again, looking at the supply chain, the visibility that these groups would want to have in that, and also love it if we can also think about, there is such an extreme shortage of breast milk, donated breast milk. What can we do to incentivize that? A lot of the moms and the women out there that donate do it out of the goodness of their heart because they want to give and they want to help, which is awesome, and that's got to be there, but what else could there be? And so that's kind of a bonus point if we can really think about that, because that's a problem that we're trying to look at as well. So did we go through the scenarios?
Sure. So we will have about 15 minutes per scenario. You're going to be looking at problems that are being faced by these different players within the breast milk supply ecosystem, and applying what you think potential blockchain solutions could be to solve for those problems from the point of view of the role that you're playing. So if we could go ahead and break out, you need at least 4 or 5 people per table. You'll have a moderator per table. We may need to double up if we have a shortage, but we'll be working through the case. So you'll have about 15 minutes for that first scenario. And there is a cheat sheet on the table, Blockchain 101, for you, in case you didn't take good notes or capture all the learnings from today's presentation. So go ahead and get started on scenario A.
Come on, team.
All right. I was role of mom. So concerns and thoughts with blockchain that I want to get solved are, how about the quality of the breast milk that I'm getting from the mom, as I can't produce it, but maybe another donor can? And what about their immunity, where they're coming from, their equipment? And as well as, if there is an issue, can they track it? Where did it misstep? And if something did happen, are the people in play that touch that milk are able to help correct and care for my child?
Yeah. All right, I was the role of the donor. First off, there's going to need to be some sort of compensation, whether it's perks or monetary. And not everybody will be willing to do it out of the goodness of their heart. There might be those people, so that could be one level of some sort of contract they have with the bank. Second level could be those perks, like maybe there's childcare while I come in, do what I need to do. I can use the equipment that's there, so I know that it's serviced. I don't have to take care of cleaning it, servicing it, that sort of thing. That goes into making sure that things are good for the mother. There could also just be, just give me the money and I'll take care of where my kid is during this time when I'm in offering my donations. But the main thing would needing to have a relationship with the bank, having the education around what's needed, how much, are my services actually needed?
Okay, so I'm the hospital, and what I do, I'll stand beside the bank, and we're focused on standardization and the educational management system behind the token that we'll be using in the ecosystem with the mother and the donor.
We actually discussed kind of a JV between us, so we could control the supply chain, and the hospital would have an eye on what we had in reserve for them, and then we would be able to control the education through the hospital system as well, and then the quality would also be visible in the origin.
Can you speak to tokenization and non-tokenization?
Okay, so with tokenization, we are incentivizing the donor to come into the ecosystem and use that, and we're also looking at the provenance of the milk within the breast bank, so that's bringing a lot of transparency. So with a token, we could incentivize the mother. Without a token, there could just be a smart contract or a contract in place to make sure the process goes smoothly. Educational management, what the mom wants to know, what the donor needs, and that.
Yes, does the tokenization basically allow for reward? Like
Yes.
Your rewards card.
Pretty much like a Food Line MVP card.
Without that, that's how you identify who to donate. I got you.
Right. And also, I wanted to add with other, if the bank, since the bank is creating the token, sort of like an ICO, there will be, when they're working with other ecosystems, there is an authentication and verification part, and that also incentivizes people to use the token or get into the ecosystem.
Who's going to pay for the servers?
Our investor.
Let's give a round of applause. Great job, great job. Which table's up next? Either volunteer or voluntold. We'll come to this side of the room. Come to this side of the room. We need a volunteer to present. Okay. Go for it. Which scenario are you presenting on?
The last one.
Okay, perfect. Scenario 3.
Great. Okay. My table didn't want to join me. But they're here in spirit. So ours is some of the similar things. We want to enable trust, but we also want to work with the supply and demand and anticipate the demand based on the supply of women having babies. So we want everything to be purely traceable. We want to waive the deductible for any woman who donates breast milk in the hospital. Isn't that a little incentive? And they don't have to donate it, they just have to try. And we want to try and keep the same donor with the same recipient, especially if they're a NICU baby. So that's very important to us, is to keep that continuity of the same donor. For the breast milk bank, we want to operate it very similar to the Red Cross, and have a when patients go in for their medical care last trimester, they go in every week. So their OBGYN could talk to them about donating and could pre-qualify them as good donors based on drugs, lifestyle, etc., and things that they might be taking that could transfer through the breast milk. So they're going to proactively ask people to donate. Something like the scenario, so many babies are born and end up in the NICU. If your baby were in the NICU, you would want breast milk. Would you be willing to donate? And so based on that, we would be able to know how many people we would need to ask for donations to keep the blood bank up. Because if we stay in touch with our OBGYNs, we know how many babies are expected to be born. We know what % usually end up in NICU, so we know how to plan for our supply. And we can expand that into rural areas so that their supply and demand can be met. And then as a mom, we want to obviously have pure breast milk, so that's handled through the somewhat of a Red Cross scenario. And we want to be able to thank the donors for saving the lives. And for the donors, we wanted them to be thanked. We stayed away from any monetary compensation. Except for the deductible. Except for the deductible. So that's all I have.
Good job.
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. All right. Scott looks like he's gearing up. Come right on up here.
Thank you. So I'll take scenario 3. We kind of jump straight to the solution and to build on what you guys talked about. So we had some of the things that you guys had said. I thought you had some really good ideas. We want to build kind of a Internet of Things supply chain that's tracked by the blockchain that follows the entire way from the donor all the way to the recipient, right? And we want to use the that system to actually create a currency that reimburses the mom with that currency. And we also want her to have the ability to be able to track when, from the time she's donated to where her donation has actually been used. Think about the power of that. If it's going to a particular patient, and that emotional tie, that responsiveness, and like you had talked about with kind of tracking that supply chain, we want the app to be able to identify, or the blockchain to be able to identify that our supply is low, and to be able to ping that donor directly to ask for her to come back and donate. Let's see, so those were the big things that we had that were different. And then the other thing that we're going to do and we're going to have an investor build this for us, the whole blockchain, because then once we figure this out, we've basically built an entire platform that was designed around milk donations, but we're going to use it for everything from blood to eggs to sperm to even looking at adoptive parents and tracking a lot of those medical records, because you've basically created a platform that you build once, and then we're going to sell the daylights out of it. Right. Any investors? I'm at the back table.
Exciting. So we are actually going beyond the case, right? I love that. Sasha, you want to do a presentation?
Well, while we were role-playing here, we figured out that whether we were representing hospital, bank, mom, or donor, we kind of had some similarities. We figured out we all cared about healthy babies. So readmission rates, whether it is your hospital or mom or donor, we all have children, or we all know somebody has children, right? So we have this end goal in mind, which is quality, like improving health of the babies. We also cared all about the quality of the milk that's being produced and donated. And we cared to have enough supply. And we also cared to trace it all. So we decided that Breast Milk Bank will create a nonprofit. It will be a privately in public partnership. And it will be funded through federal, state, and private donations. And bank will get all stakeholders such as hospital, donors, and moms at the same place. We will put together protocols in place and share data. And we will create protocols that will allow, whether it is your mom or a donor or a hospital, you will have different accessibility points to the data. But we all will share the data, and we will track it, and we will incentivize financially our donor moms. So it will be a business, essentially.
Spoken like a true entrepreneur, starting businesses. All right, and we have, last but not least, Claudia, come on up here.
I somehow got nominated.
No surprise there.
How I got nominated. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I think a lot of you have said some of the things we talked about. We got really kind of, in a really good way, talking about the forensics of this all. And so, really making sure how valid is the blockchain and how much can we trust it. Obviously, it can't be erased, but how much can that be edited, and how does it get edited? And then, like, we had an example about, like, what if my birth date's wrong? Or what if the donor mom's name gets written over and you're trying to contact the donor? So we had a lot of talk about security and how that all works. I think, I'm just trying to think what else was a little bit different. We talked about, safety, quality is so important. We feel like probably the health systems or the hospital will fund this, because if they have better outcomes in their NICU, lower length of stay, higher customer satisfaction or patient satisfaction, they get paid more. They have an opportunity to make more money, so they should probably fund these kind of investments, to keep the donor banks going. So that might be the only kind of different thing we talked about.
Fantastic. So as you can see, we all tackled the same case, we looked at the same scenarios, but because of the diversity of the teams that we had present, came up with very different solutions, from tokenization to the Internet of Things, to new business models, right? To how to incentivize donor contributions. So really had some interesting perspectives. I'm curious, you all seem to do that pretty easily. Were there any barriers or limitations as you were working through the case that you came across that you think might have posed challenges to the implementation of that solution? Any potential barriers? Sasha.
The reason we came up with this partnership and for the bank to drive this partnership is because we realized that there was a lot of data and protocols that had to be put in place. So there's a lot of data and protocols that have to be put in place to trace the quality and the quantity and to make sure the proper incentive is there for the donor. So it was a barrier then, definitely, like which standard do we choose, right, to keep this data, to organize this data? How do we get all of the stakeholders agree to it? Which stakeholders? We did toy with an idea. What if we have a database just between a hospital and a bank? Should we really involve a mom? And then at the very end, we're like, we think that we have to have all four come together. And we have to have a technology team that agreed from each stakeholder. Maybe not from mom and donors, but we'll have a good incentive for them to partake in that. Tim, did I miss anything?
Another barrier right here.
I mean, the biggest thing for me is no matter how good the blockchain is, what goes in matters. So if you don't have a good check on what gets entered into it, how do you verify that as it goes in the first place? Then everything down the line is useless if it's wrong. You know, you might be able to modify it once it's in there and you have that audit trail, but there's still something that has to be gathered, whether it's what's the liability of an OB who says this woman's okay, but she's not, or something else like that. So just getting it in there, getting that data in there, and how much can you really automate for the reliability.
So it sounds like a potential collaboration between you and Claudia's group here with the forensic solution going on. Okay.
As long as there's beer.
Khari. So his incentive is beer. So that's a very straightforward transaction. Put a token on that. Khari?
Token on that, yeah.
An initial barrier that I was thinking about was for the blockchain solution, which protocol would effectively work with what we're trying to do. And as soon as we got to talking, it was about communication, tracking, and making sure that the security was there. So just understanding some of the latest blockchain protocols, some that we can implement right now into healthcare because of regulations like the ER 721 versus using one that's getting ready to come out, because they are making advances, and the 721, it seems to be like the model for healthcare based on the needs and the ability to really track and give out incentives based on the tracking.
Did I see a hand over here? Cathy? Yes, you can come up here.
The thing that I always struggle with blockchain is the user interface. So this mom can be in rural North Carolina and may not have a fancy computer or a fancy iPad. So how does that mom communicate to the blockchain? What does that interface look like? Is that an app on her phone, or what is it? So I think that could be a barrier, is how do you make that an easy technology to adopt, whether you're technology savvy or not. And then on top of that, I have to wear my security hat here. How do you educate them to use that technology securely? So how do you avoid these people from falling for phishing emails and downloading malware and propagating ransomware? So also there's this, beyond the adoption and the propagation of the technology, you have to make sure there is a proper use and governance on how to use that technology. Two barriers.
Absolutely. It's always nice to have a resident cybersecurity expert in the house. Any other barriers that came up? Any key learnings or ahas from today's discussion? Because I know we hit you with a ton. It's kind of like drinking from a fire hose in that beginning, but you all dived right in, and I appreciate that collaboration. So any key learnings coming out of this? Surprises, maybe you didn't think you knew before you came, and now you do know. Susan.
Since I'm the oldest one in the room, I'm just going to share a story of how exciting it is to be here. Because in my lifetime, I started in the 70s doing research for Breast Cancer Detection Center. And I'll set this down right here. And what I had during the interviews was a program card. You know, that you send through, for Fortran. And I would ask a question, and I would punch a hole. And then I would put them in a shoebox and jiggle the shoebox and stick a rod through, shake it, and I would count the cards that fell. And if I had 2 questions, I would count the cards that fell, restack them, restick it through. So if I wanted the number of women who had a right upper quadrant mass that was malignant, I had to do that 4 times. So we have gone from that to this in my lifetime.
You know, that story just makes my heart smile, absolutely. You know, because as we were putting together this event, you know, I just had this kind of image in my mind. I don't know how many of you all have seen the movie Hidden Figures. Okay, so there's a scene where, you know, there are human computers calculating manually all of those calculations, and then, you know, they realize they have to learn about this new disruptive technology that is going to really change the game in terms of the work they're doing. And so I feel very much that blockchain is one of those things, right? We all, whether we are technical or non-technical, will be impacted by that technology in some form or fashion. And so now is our time to really equip ourselves with the tools, the knowledge, the understanding to really prepare for the future. So I think we'll end on that note. I really do appreciate that. I'll ask Nita to come up and close us out, but thank you all for your teaming, for your collaboration, for your contributions, for all of the support that went into making this case exercise so impactful. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming out and supporting Health Tech Women today. We hope this was a fun, an interactive and engaging discussion and evening for you. I just wanted to take a couple minutes and thank all of our volunteers and our partners and our sponsors that made this event possible. So as Sasha mentioned, Health Tech Women is a volunteer-led and volunteer-driven organization. So if anyone that has volunteered for this event or volunteered for any past event, if you could please stand and be recognized, that would be awesome. Smelly. Awesome. And then in terms of the location, a big shout out and thank you to Susan Rucker and Timothy Ignasher for making the event possible here at the Myers Park Country Club. And also want to give a big shout out to the Myers Park Country Club team as well for all the planning and logistics that went in. A huge thank you to Michael Johnson with Atrium Health and Yeti for all of the programming for this event. It takes a village, and it took a considerable amount of time and energy to put the program together for this event. So many months of planning, lots of herding cats. Many thanks to the speakers and moderators who also volunteered their time. And then finally, just wanted to thank our partners and our sponsors for this event. So a big thank you to GCHEG, who has been a supporting partner with Health Tech Women since the beginning. Dean, I didn't know if you wanted to make any comments or say any words.
Just really appreciate the opportunity to partner with you guys and provide credit to our members and continue to promote your organization to attract more women to the healthcare technology space. Happy to be part of it.
Awesome, thank you. And a big thank you to Deloitte as well, who provided the funding for this event. So many thanks to Claudia. Any words or comments on your end?
No, we learned a lot. Teresa Drew, our office managing partner, funded this, so I'll send her a thank you. But I think it's been a great night, and I know we learned a lot, and it's been a great discussion. So hope that propels all the progress in your different companies and ventures.
Awesome. And then finally, before we adjourn, Jess, I don't know if you want to come up and give a few words about the feedback, or you want me to just... Okay. All right. We always are looking for feedback so we can continue to improve our events and improve the curated content that we provide. We provide events on a quarterly basis, and so there are surveys at each of the tables. If you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes and filling those out, We also are always looking for volunteers, and we have volunteer cards at each table as well. So if you're interested in volunteering with us, we encourage you to fill those out. Our next event is Tuesday, December 4th. And we are working on the programming for that event for the next few months. So be on the lookout for emails and communication about that. We hope to see many, if not all of you there. And then finally, before we close out the event, a big thank you to Brian Bunn and his team for all the videography. They kind of came in last minute and basically just sort of saved the day from video content perspective. So many thanks to them. And with that, that's it. Thank you again, and safe travels this evening, and we look forward to seeing you in December. Thank you.